My name is Hillman, and this is my story. I was raised in Columbia, South Carolina, and a family of five, and I was the only boy. I had four sisters, and when I was very young, my dad started me in sports. I played basketball and baseball, and but when I was 11 years old, he started me playing golf, and boy, did I love golf. And one of the things about my dad was he owned a toy store and later became the head of a business that distributed toys, and he sold 2 million yo-yos in 1966, if you can imagine that. And so it was great being a kid growing up in a family where your dad owned a toy store. And so it was a great childhood. But my dad started me playing golf when I was 11 years old, and that I really loved that game. And by the time I was 14, I had already had 3 hole-in-ones and was playing junior golf on the circuit all over our state. And I really knew very early what I wanted to do when I got older. This was a passion for me at this young age, and so by 14 I was really developing quite well. I had broken 73 times. If you're a golfer, you know what that means. And but then one day I was sitting at home and I was watching I Dream of Jeannie, my favorite TV show, and I was watching it, and all of a sudden a news broadcast came on, and it said 3 men had been killed in an airplane crash. And even now it touches me in thinking about, the change it had on our family at that time. How, when your dad is there one day and he's gone the next. Well, you can imagine what kind of change this had in our family. And over the next few years, my mom was devastated over that experience. And for 2 years, I would be in my home and she would be really crying and just going through a real tough time. But we were a church-growing family, but we really didn't, have a real personal relationship with God. It was very much of a structured, more rules, and so anyway, this experience caused my mom to really cry out to the Lord, and she had an experience with God, and through that experience she came to know Jesus Christ in a very personal way. Well, over the next years, as she got stronger and stronger, she tried to share that experience with me, but I was so bent on golf that I really wasn't interested. Years would go by. By the time I was 17, I got a golf scholarship to the University of South Carolina. Went there for 4 years, but instead of getting better, I sort of mellowed out and didn't become all the golfer that I'd hoped to be, because I really wanted to play the tour professionally. That was my goal. So I get out of college and I decide that I need to get away from my mom because she's preaching at me. I'm not interested. I leave and I go to North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I go there to get away from her, and also to simply raise money to get on the PGA Tour. And I start gambling and getting involved with the wrong crowd. Ultimately, I hit a crisis point, and at that crisis point, I began to ask some very simple questions that I think all of us ask at one time or another. Why am I here on earth? Why did God make me? I had a belief, I had a head knowledge belief in God, but I didn't have any kind of relationship. And so it was just interesting to me that the pastor who was the pastor of my church when I was growing up had moved to this location in North Myrtle Beach, and so he and my mother had been talking, and they were really in cahoots with each other, trying to reach me, and I wanted nothing to do with it. But he was a nice guy, and so I accommodated him by going out and having a meal with him. He even came to his church one day, and I'll never forget going into his church one day and seeing something very different. And what I saw there was a different kind of person, a person that loved people. They accepted me for who I was, and it was unexplainable kind of love that was in that church. I'll never forget sitting down with this pastor, saying, I think I understand that I'm probably not a Christian, but if I was to make a decision of faith in Christ, would I have to give up this and this and this? And I was used to being told, well, you have to do this if you're going to be a Christian. But he said, no, I'm not going to tell you have to give up anything. You know, all you have to do is invite Christ into your life, and he will begin to change you, and you will begin to do the things that he desires you to do as you come to know him in a personal way. Well, that gave me the freedom to take the first step. So I invited Jesus into my life, and my life radically changed from that day forth. I couldn't explain it, but something was different. And over the next several months and ultimately years, God would totally transform my life into a life of purpose and meaning. And so God began to show up in very unusual ways. I began to see answers to prayer. And so as I began this journey, one of the things I did was I took a break from golf for a season. I'd never done this. And so I decided to go out to Colorado. And I went out to Colorado at an outward bound school. And on my way back, my car broke down in Vail, Colorado. And people kid me about that and say, sure, your car broke down in Vail, Colorado. But it did. And I had $50 in my pocket. And I ended up connecting with some Christians in the city, and they were part of a church plant, if you will, of a church called Calvary Chapel out of Costa Mesa, California. And there they embraced me. They gave me some money to get established, and I really grew as a Christian there. And so in 1980, I decided that, well, if I'm this sold out for the Lord, I'm supposed to be to go to Bible school. And so I ended up going to Bible school in Twin Peaks, California, and it was Calvary Chapel. And so it was just a short-term school, about 4 months, just to really focus on studying the Bible. And so as I came out of that, I said, well, maybe I'm supposed to be a pastor. And so when I came out of there, I came to Atlanta to be assistant pastor at a church, if you can imagine that. Well, luckily for me, the position was reduced, and I was fired, basically. I was not made out to be a pastor. And that put me in the marketplace where I was supposed to be. And so over the next few years, I would be in advertising. Ultimately, I would own an advertising agency starting in 1984 that would last for 12 years. But then in 1994, I had a major crisis. One day my wife came in and asked if we could separate. We'd been in challenging relationship for many, many years. And even so, I was very committed to working through those, but she had come to the end. And within 3 months, I would have a number of things happen to me. I would have over $500,000 that I would lose through 2 different investments, kind of like a Bernie Madoff situation. Was not able to recover it. Then I had a business that I lost 80% of my business because one client represented 80% of our billings. And then he stuck me for $140,000. So life went from one place to a whole nother place within 3 to 4 months. This ushered me into a season of 7 years of adversity. And it was a season where I was really questioning the love of God, or even if God existed, how could a God of love allow me to go through such things? And so it was a real questioning time. About 2 years into my adversity, I'd gotten an audio tape by a man named Gunnar Olson, who was the founder of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce. And on that tape it said, God is raising up Josephs all over the world, and it's often signified by them going through extraordinary adversity in their personal and business life. Well, that was all I heard of that message. I said, I must meet this man. And well, it turned out he was going to be in the United States in 2 months. I flew to Washington hoping to meet him. The night of a 75-nation conference, he allowed this perfect stranger to come and meet him in his penthouse suite. And he sat down and listened to my story. And he said, Os, after listening to your story, all I can tell you is that you have a Joseph calling on your life. What that means is that God uses adversity for a spiritual and a physical calling for others and His kingdom. Well, I didn't quite understand all that. He said, you know, you've gone through some mistakes probably, and you have, you're not a perfect person, but I want you to know that your call is greater than the adversity or even the mistakes that you have made. Well, I walked in a victim that night, and I walked out with a call. And he had written down a couple of napkins. He drew a diagram. He says, "Os, this is where you are, and this is where you're going to go as you press into the Lord." And so I'll never forget that. And so as I walked out over the next several years, everything he said came true. My adversity in that season would last 7 years to the month. In fact, 7 years to the month, I had my finances restored completely. And God began to birth something in me as I began to seek God and understand why I went through the adversities. In 1999, I began writing this simple little devotional called TGIF, Today God is First. And I simply would wake up every morning and God would give me a simple phrase, a scripture verse to apply to my own journey through adversity and understanding how God views our work life. And this caught on as people would begin to get it. My friends would circulate it to others, and it would spread throughout the internet. And then an internet site started putting it on their site, and it began growing and growing. To today, it goes to several 100,000 people a day by email. And I get letters from people every day saying, you spoke right into my situation. And so I've realized through that experience that God has turned my valley of Achor, which the word Achor means trouble, into a door of hope. Into a door of hope for me and a door of hope for many others that they have learned from my own journey. And so as I look at what God is doing in my life, I see where there's been a tapestry, and that He always turns our adversity into something good if we allow Him to. I'll never forget, someone once said that Jesus was the only one who made plan A. The rest of us, He turns our B plans and C plans into His A plans. And I thought that was a wonderful way of expressing how God turns everything to good if we allow Him to. And so now, 25 nations later and over 12 books later, I can see God's hand over my life to turn the Valley of Achor into a door of hope. And God is using it. And so I've realized that God is a personal God, and He desires to have a relationship with us through Jesus. And so I'm so glad God turned my Valley of Achor into a door of hope.